Hey guys, tonight we're stepping through a heavy wooden door into a world where your morning coffee, well, your morning ale, can't be stirred counterclockwise without inviting ruin. You're standing in the dim pre-dawn of a medieval cottage, watching a housewife who hasn't slept well because she heard an owl last night, and everyone knows what that means. The rushes on the floor smell of dried lavender and something less pleasant, and frost patterns crawl across the single glazed window like skeletal fingers. This is a world where every mundane task carries invisible weight, where sweeping the floor wrong could doom your family, and where you'd better remember which shoe goes on which foot first, or the entire day spirals into chaos. The story may solve mysteries you never had an explanation for, like why your grandmother insisted on certain kitchen habits that seemed to make no logical sense. So, before you explore the story with me, please take a moment to help me subscribe to the channel, like and share this video, or maybe leave a comment below. But make sure you do it when you really like what I bring to you. Tell me where you're listening from tonight, whether you're tucked into bed in Toronto or winding down after work in Tokyo, and if you've ever caught yourself following a superstition without knowing why. Now, let's keep the lights as soft as possible. Turn on the fan for a gentle sound to help the story feel more emotional, and let's embark on tonight's journey together. You wake before the rooster crows, because of course you do. The medieval housewife's day begins in darkness, and you're fumbling for the tinder box with fingers still clumsy from sleep. But before you can even think about lighting the hearth fire or checking whether the bread dough survived the night, there's the threshold to consider. Every single morning without fail, you must address the doorstep, that liminal space between the safe interior of your home and the wild demon-infested world beyond. You grab the broom, but here's where it gets interesting. You don't sweep outward like a sensible person trying to remove dirt. No, you sweep inward, pulling the bristles toward you in careful strokes, because during the night, malevolent spirits have congregated just outside your door. They've been waiting, these formless things, testing the boundaries of your home's protection. By sweeping inward, you're not removing them, you're trapping them in the bristles, binding them in the straw, rendering them impotent. Historians have documented this practice across England, France, and the Germanic regions, with slight variations, but the same essential logic. The threshold is a battlefield, and the broom is your first weapon of the day. Once the sweeping is complete, you reach for the salt. Not the precious stuff you use sparingly in cooking, but the coarser grain kept specifically for protection. You sprinkle it in a line across the doorstep, sometimes in complex patterns that your mother taught you, that her mother taught her, going back generations to a time before anyone can remember. The salt line serves multiple purposes. It purifies, it creates a barrier, and it reveals. If anything has crossed your threshold during the night with ill intent, the salt will show disturbance come morning. You've checked it every dawn for years and never seen anything amiss, but the one morning you forget could be the morning something slips through. The window receives similar attention. You trace a cross on the cold glass with your fingertip, sometimes using spit, sometimes using oil, blessed by the priest 3 villages over, who's rumored to have unusually strong prayers. This cross isn't just Christian symbolism, though that's certainly part of it. It's a geometric seal, a pattern that confuses evil entities who apparently can't navigate right angles. Historians still argue whether these practices originated from pre-Christian tradition and were later adopted by the church, or whether they flowed the opposite direction. But standing here in the dark, you're not concerned with theological origins. You're concerned with keeping your family safe. Now you can turn to the hearth, but even here, superstition governs your movements. You never light the fire with wood from a tree struck by lightning, unless you're specifically trying to draw lightning to your home, which you're definitely not. You never use elder wood because elder trees house protective spirits who take offense at being burned. You arrange the kindling in a specific pattern, learned so young you can't remember not knowing it, because a poorly built fire means a poorly built day. As the flames catch and the cottage begins to warm, you glance at the various charms stationed around the room. There's a horseshoe above the door, positioned with the ends pointing upward so the luck doesn't drain out. Your neighbor insists it should point down to pour luck onto those who enter, and you've had this argument for 7 years running with no resolution in sight. There's a hagstone, a rock with a natural hole worn through it, hanging on a red thread near the window. Through that hole, you can supposedly see fairies and spirits as they truly are, though you've never been brave enough to actually look through it at night. Some knowledge, you figure, is better left ungained. You notice the bread dough has risen nicely overnight, which is a relief because tomorrow you'll learn just how prophetic bread can be. The bucket of water you left out has a thin skin of ice on top, which you crack carefully, breaking ice the wrong way, aggressively with violence, shows disrespect to the water spirits, and disrespected water spirits make women's monthly courses irregular. At least, that's what the midwife says, and you're not about to test her wisdom. Your husband will wake soon, and you'll need to have his morning ale ready, warmed by the fire, stirred exactly 7 times clockwise. Why 7? Why clockwise? Because 3 generations of women in your family have done it this way, and all their husbands lived to reasonable ages without any mysterious illnesses. Correlation isn't causation, but in a world without germ theory or antibiotics, correlation is all you have. The cat emerges from wherever she spent the night, probably hunting mice in the walls, and begins washing her face. You watch carefully. If she washes behind her ears, rain is coming, and you'll need to bring in the washing you planned to hang. If she washes only her face, the day will be fair. This morning she's doing both, which means changeable weather, which means you'll be running in and out all day, rescuing laundry. The cat, of course, is entirely focused on removing mouse blood from her whiskers and has no idea she's serving as your meteorological consultant. There's a strange comfort in these rituals, you realize, as the cottage fills with watery dawn light. Each action is prescribed, tested, proven. You're not making decisions in a void. You're following a pattern laid down by countless women before you, women who survived plagues and famines and wars, and if their superstitions helped them survive, well, who are you to abandon them now? Modern scholars might call this magical thinking, a way of imposing order on a chaotic universe, but you call it common sense. The learned men in their universities can debate theology and philosophy. You're keeping demons out of your kitchen.
The bread dough sits in its wooden bowl like a pale living thing, and you approach it with the same attention you'd give a sleeping baby. Because in many ways this dough is alive. Yeasts you can't see are working their invisible magic, and the result will tell you things about your family's immediate future that you'd rather know in advance. You press one finger gently into the surface, watching how quickly the dough springs back. A vigorous return means vigorous health for your household. A sluggish response, or worse, a dent that remains, means someone will fall ill before the week is out. But the real divination happens when you shape the loaves. You've divided the dough into 3 portions, one for today, one for tomorrow, one for the day after. And as you work the first portion on your floured board, you watch for signs. If the dough is unusually sticky, clinging to your hands like it doesn't want to let go, visitors are coming, probably unwanted ones, because welcome visitors are foretold by dough that's unusually easy to work, practically shaping itself. This morning's dough is behaving normally, which means a normal few days ahead, and you'll take that blessing without complaint. You shape the loaf carefully, creating a rounded dome, and then comes the critical part, scoring the top. You take your sharpest knife and cut a cross into the surface, not for decoration, but to let the devil out. Yes, the devil, who apparently likes to hide in unbaked bread dough. The cross also helps the loaf rise evenly, but that practical explanation comes a distant second to the spiritual one. Your grandmother once told you about a woman 2 villages over who refused to score her loaves, claiming such superstitions were nonsense, and every single loaf she baked afterward came out dense and hard as stone. Whether that was divine retribution or simple physics, unscored loaves don't vent steam properly. The lesson was clear. Don't skip the cross. Into the oven the loaves go, nestled among the coals you've raked to one side of the hearth. Now comes the waiting and the watching. A loaf that rises beautifully, browning evenly, its cross opening like flower petals, means prosperity and harmony. A loaf that stays flat, that browns unevenly, or worst of all, that collapses in the oven, means trouble. And if a loaf collapses, you know exactly what happened. Witches danced on your roof last night. This isn't metaphorical. You mean actual witches, in actual physical form, stomping around on your thatch at midnight, and their malevolent weight somehow transferred through the roof beams, through the air itself, down into your bread dough, causing it to fall. Can you prove this? Of course not. But can anyone prove it didn't happen? Also no. And in a world where proof is scarce and consequences are dire, you'd rather take precautions. Next time you'll hang a bunch of rowan berries from the rafters. Witches hate rowan. Or maybe sprinkle more salt around the house's perimeter. Historians have found hundreds of documented cases of women blaming bread failure on supernatural interference. And while modern bakers understand that temperature fluctuations, old yeast, or over-mixing can cause collapse, the medieval kitchen offered no such explanations. You work with invisible forces, yeast, heat, time, and when invisible forces fail, it's reasonable to blame other invisible forces. The logic is airtight. While the bread bakes, you turn your attention to the porridge. Another opportunity for kitchen divination. You're stirring oats and water and a precious bit of milk in your iron pot, and you must, absolutely must, stir clockwise. Counterclockwise stirring is Widdershins, against the sun's path, against the natural order, and it invites chaos. You've heard stories of women who stirred widdershins and had their porridge turn inexplicably bitter, or found dead flies in it despite the pot being covered, or had their children refuse to eat it and waste away. These stories are probably exaggerated, but probably isn't the same as certainly. So you stir clockwise, your wooden spoon making lazy circles, and you count 7 times, 9 times, 13 times. There's debate about the correct number, but everyone agrees it must be odd. Even numbers are stable, complete, closed. Odd numbers are active, magical, open to possibility. A bubble rising in the centre of the pot and popping with a wet plop means a letter is coming. From whom? About what? The porridge doesn't specify, but information is on its way. If the porridge boils over despite your careful watching, someone in the family will cry before nightfall. You've found this to be eerily accurate, though it might just be that boiling over creates a mess that makes you cry from frustration. Historians still argue whether these kitchen omens reflect genuine folk wisdom about reading patterns and probabilities, or whether they're simply self-fulfilling prophecies where anxiety about the omen creates the predicted outcome. This smell of baking bread fills the cottage now, rich and yeasty and fundamentally comforting. Your husband has woken and is pulling on his boots, and you hand him his warm ale, which he accepts with a grunt. He's not a man of many words before noon, which suits you fine because you're busy listening to the bread. Yes, listening. A loaf that sings, making tiny crackling sounds as the crust forms, is a happy loaf, a blessed loaf. Silence from the oven is concerning. And if you hear what sounds like sighing or moaning, you pull the loaf out immediately regardless of whether it's done, because a moaning loaf is possessed and must be thrown to the pigs. You've only encountered a moaning loaf once, 3 years ago, and you still don't know if it was actually moaning or if it was just steam escaping in an odd way. But you weren't about to investigate further. The pigs ate it enthusiastically, which proved either that pigs don't care about demonic possession, or that the loaf was fine all along. Either way, better safe than sorry. The morning's baking is successful. 3 lovely loaves, well risen, evenly browned, singing contentedly as they cool on the wooden rack. You allow yourself a moment of pride. Tomorrow these loaves will feed your family, and the act of breaking bread together carries its own superstitions. You never cut a loaf while it's still hot, because that's cutting into living flesh and brings bad luck. You never place a loaf upside down, because that's how bread is positioned at funerals. And you never, ever throw away bread even if it's mouldy. You give it to animals or the poor, or you bury it respectfully, because bread is sacred, and wasting it offends both God and nature. Your neighbour appears at the door. You heard her coming because the cat's ears pricked up, which means a woman approaching, whereas flat ears mean a man, and she's brought eggs to trade for some of your herbs. But she's also brought gossip, which is the real currency of the village. Apparently the miller's wife found a dead spider in her bread dough yesterday, and insisted on baking it anyway, spider included, because removing it would insult the spider's spirit and cause all future bread to fail. The loaf turned out fine, reportedly, though nobody wanted to eat the slice containing the actual spider. You and your neighbour share a look that encompasses centuries of female practicality, meeting ridiculous superstition, and you both laugh, the sound bright in the warming kitchen. But then she leans closer and whispers that her own bread yesterday came out with a huge crack down one side despite perfect scoring, and she's worried it means her marriage is cracking too. You tell her, gently because she's genuinely distressed, that sometimes bread just cracks, that ovens are unpredictable, that one omen doesn't determine fate. But even as you say it, you're mentally reviewing the state of her marriage, and you have to admit there have been tensions lately. Maybe the bread knows something you don't, Or maybe anxiety about the bread is making her see marriage problems that were always there. In the medieval kitchen, cause and effect tangle together like yarn, and you've long since given up trying to separate them. The basket of soiled linens sits in the corner like an accusation, and you've been avoiding it for 2 days because laundry is perhaps the most supernaturally dangerous household task you'll undertake all week. It's not the physical labour that worries you. You're accustomed to hauling water and scrubbing until your knuckles crack. It's the timing. Wash on the wrong day, and you're not just cleaning clothes, you're actively courting death, inviting it to take up residence in your home like an unwanted lodger who never leaves. Monday is the traditional washing day, and there's solid reasoning behind this that has nothing to do with superstition. You've rested on Sunday, the fire is hot from baking bread, and you have the whole week ahead to dry everything. But Monday washing comes with strict protocols. You must begin before the church bells ring for morning prayers, because starting after the bells means you're washing while the angels are singing, and wet laundry during angel song summons drowning deaths. Your cousin's friend's sister supposedly ignored this rule, and her youngest child fell into the mill pond that very afternoon. Coincidence? Perhaps. But you're at the washing tub before dawn anyway, breath misting in the cold air, hands already aching in anticipation. Friday washing is absolutely forbidden, and this rule has teeth. Friday is the day Christ died, and to wash clothes on that sorrowful day is to wash his burial shroud, to replay his death, to invite crucifixion energy into your domestic space. Women who wash on Friday are said to be washing their own shrouds, preparing the linens for their own deaths. You've never tested this superstition, and you never will, because the one time your mother washed on Friday, in an emergency, her husband had fallen ill and soiled everything. He died before the month was out. Historians have documented this Friday prohibition across virtually all of Christian Europe. With slight variations but universal agreement, Friday laundry equals death. Saturday washing is suspect too, though less dramatically so. Washing on Saturday suggests you're too lazy or disorganised to have finished during the proper week, and it means you'll be doing your work right up until the Sabbath, which shows poor planning and possibly weak faith. But worse, Saturday washing means you'll be washing every Saturday for the rest of your life, trapped in an eternal cycle of weekend laundry because you couldn't get your act together. This seems less like divine punishment and more like simple consequence. If you can't finish washing by Friday, of course you'll end up doing it on Saturday again. But the superstition persists. Wednesday washing is controversial. Some women swear it's perfectly safe, a good midweek option if Monday was impossible. Others insist Wednesday is spy day, when the devil walks the earth observing human activity, and giving him wet laundry to report on invites his special attention to your household. You've tried Wednesday washing exactly once and nothing bad happened, but you also felt vaguely anxious the entire time, which might have been supernatural warning, or might have been simple guilt at breaking convention. You stick with Mondays now, but choosing the right day is only the beginning. You must also consider the moon phase, the weather omens, and the particular items being washed. Baby clothes, for instance, cannot be washed in water where adult clothing has been laundered, because the adult sins and sorrows will transfer to the infant garments and poison the child's temperament. You keep separate washing water for infant items, changing it frequently, adding protective herbs like chamomile and lavender. The baby doesn't care, obviously, but you care, and your mother cared, and her mother before her, back through a chain of anxious women trying their best to protect their children in a world full of invisible dangers. Whites require special prayers. You're not sure when this tradition started, But as you scrub the linen shifts and underthings, you murmur the Ave Maria, or sometimes just a simple rhyme your grandmother taught you. Wash away the dark and sin, let the light come clean within, guard this cloth and those who wear from evil's touch and devil's snare. It's probably not theologically sound, but it makes you feel better, and the whites do seem to come cleaner when you pray over them. Historians still argue whether the psychological comfort of ritual actually improves work quality, or whether the careful attention ritual requires is what makes the difference. But standing here with your raw hands in cold water, you don't care about the mechanism. You care about results. Bloodstains require completely different handling. Menstrual blood, injury blood, and birthing blood each carry different spiritual charges, and you must wash them in cold water, never hot, which sets the stain and angers the blood spirits, and preferably under a waning moon to carry the blood away. You scrub your monthly rags with salt and vinegar, both purifying agents, and you never ever hang them where men can see them. Male eyes on menstrual laundry can cause impotence, or so your mother claimed. And while your husband has never seemed affected on the occasions he's glimpsed your washing, you're not about to test the theory deliberately. The actual washing is back-breaking work. You're bent over the wooden tub, scrubbing each item against the washboard, your arms burning, water sloshing onto the floor. You've added wood ash to the water for its cleaning properties. The Lean ash breaks down dirt and grease. But it also makes your hands crack and bleed if you're not careful. Some women wear cloth wrapped around their palms, but you've never mastered the technique. So you just endure the stinging and plan to rub butter into your hands tonight as both treatment and prevention. Wringing out the heavy wet linens requires strength and technique. You twist the fabric, bracing one end against your hip, pulling with both hands, watching the water stream out. Each garment must be wrung 3 times, once for cleanliness, once for dryness, and once for protection. 2 rings or 4 rings leave the job incomplete, the garment vulnerable to spiritual contamination during the drying process. You count carefully, because losing track means starting over, and your arms are already trembling with fatigue. Now comes the hanging, which has its own elaborate rules. Shirts must be hung by the hem, never the shoulders, or the wearer will develop a hunched back. Sheets must be hung with the selvage edges aligned, or the sleeper will have crooked dreams. Undergarments must be hung in the least visible location, because exposed intimate wear invites lascivious spirits to interfere with marital relations. You're arranging everything on the rope strung across the garden, using wooden pegs your husband carved, placing each item according to ancient protocol. The wind picks up, and you watch the laundry begin to flap and dance. Laundry that dries quickly means good fortune approaching. Laundry that stays damp for days means lingering troubles. Laundry that falls from the line must be rewashed completely, no exceptions, because it's touched the earth and absorbed ground spirits that will cause skin ailments if worn. You've pegged everything securely, but you keep glancing out the window all day, monitoring the drying progress, ready to rush out if the wind strengthens. Your neighbour is also washing today. You can see her laundry across the garden fence, and there's an unspoken competition about whose whites are whiter, whose sheets are straighter, whose household is more virtuous as evidenced by the cleanliness of displayed linens. She's hung her husband's best shirt prominently, showing off her washing skills, and you respond by repositioning your finest tablecloth where it catches the most sunlight. This is female warfare conducted through laundry, and it's been happening for centuries. By afternoon, your back aches, your hands are raw, and you've successfully laundered the household's clothing without apparently invoking death or disaster. The clothes smell of soap and sunshine, and the rosemary sprigs you tucked into the washing water for protection and pleasant scent. Tomorrow you'll bring everything in, fold it carefully and store it until needed. But tonight you'll sleep soundly, knowing you've navigated one of the week's most dangerous tasks and emerged victorious. The baby sleeps in the wooden cradle your husband built before her birth, and you've spent more time protecting her from fairies than from any earthly danger. This might seem absurd to modern sensibilities, but in the medieval world, fairy theft is a genuine, documented concern that keeps mothers awake at night, watching their infants with desperate vigilance. Because the fairy folk, the good neighbours, the fair folk, the gentry, whatever careful euphemism you choose, are always looking for beautiful human babies to steal, leaving their own sickly, malformed changelings in their place. You know the signs of a changeling because every woman knows them, passed down through whispered conversations and worried instruction. A baby that was plump and healthy but suddenly becomes thin and fretful, that cries endlessly without apparent cause, that won't nurse properly, that has an oddly ancient look in its eyes. These are warning signs. A child that develops slowly, that doesn't smile or laugh at the appropriate ages, that seems somehow wrong despite no visible illness. Changeling. And once the substitution is made, getting your real baby back is nearly impossible. The fairies have taken your child into their underground halls to raise as their own, and you're left with this difficult, unhappy creature that isn't truly yours. So prevention is everything. You begin before the baby is even born, stitching protective symbols into the infant gowns, weaving red thread through the blankets because fairies cannot abide red. When the baby arrives, you place iron scissors under the cradle mattress, wide open in a cross shape. Iron is anathema to fairy folk. It burns them, repels them, creates a barrier they cannot cross. Some women use iron nails driven into the cradle frame itself, or horseshoes hung on the wall above where the baby sleeps. You've done all three, because when it comes to your daughter's safety, redundancy is wisdom, not paranoia. The scissors serve double duty. Their crossed blades form a protective X, and their iron composition creates a spiritual barrier, but they also represent the ability to cut connections, to sever fairy attempts at contact before they succeed. You check them every night, ensuring they haven't shifted closed, because closed scissors lose their protective power. Your husband thinks this is nonsense, but he also won't remove the scissors, which tells you he's not entirely convinced of his skepticism. You never, ever praise your baby directly within anyone's hearing. This is perhaps the hardest rule to follow, because she's genuinely beautiful, pink-cheeked, bright-eyed, perfectly formed, and you want to exclaim over her loveliness the way other mothers do with less attractive infants. But praise attracts fairy attention. Compliments are like beacons announcing, here is something valuable, something worth stealing. So when visitors coo over your daughter, you respond with deflection. Oh, she's well enough, I suppose. Or she cries terribly at night. Or even, she's rather plain, really. You speak these lies while your heart bursts with pride, but maternal love requires sacrifice, and temporary dishonesty seems a small price for permanent safety. Other mothers understand this code. When your neighbour remarks that your baby is rather small, you recognise this as high praise disguised as criticism, a compliment delivered backward to confuse any listening fairies. You respond in kind. Yes, and so noisy too. Quite the worst sleeper in the village. Both of you smile, knowing you're actually saying our babies are wonderful, but doing so in a language the fair folk hopefully can't decipher, Historians have documented this practice of ritual insult or strategic understatement regarding infants across Celtic regions, Scandinavian countries, and parts of Eastern Europe, with some scholars arguing it reflects genuine belief in fairy theft, while others suggest it's a psychological defense mechanism against infant mortality. If you don't openly love the baby, losing the baby hurts less. But you're not thinking about scholarly interpretations. You're thinking about the woman 3 villages over whose healthy son suddenly stopped thriving and died before his first birthday, and everyone whispered it was a changeling that had simply given up and expired. Baptism offers some protection, which is why you had your daughter christened as quickly as possible, barely 2 weeks after birth. An unbaptized baby is particularly vulnerable, existing in spiritual limbo, unclaimed by heaven, and therefore available to other powers. The priest poured holy water over her tiny head, spoke the sacred words, and you felt something settle in your chest. Not quite relief, because the danger never fully passes, but at least one layer of protection was established. Some mothers are so anxious they perform emergency baptisms at home immediately after birth, just in case the baby doesn't survive long enough for the church ceremony. You keep a Bible in the room where the baby sleeps, open to Psalm 121. The Lord will keep you from all harm. He will watch over your life. The Lord will watch over your coming and going both now and forevermore. You can't read the words yourself, but the priest read them to you once, and knowing they're there, those ancient promises hovering over your daughter's cradle, provides comfort. The fairies, being creatures of pre-Christian vintage, supposedly recoil from scripture, though historians still argue whether fairy lore was truly pre-Christian or was actually created later as a way to explain misfortune in a Christian framework. Salt plays its role here too. You've sprinkled a thin line of salt around the cradle's perimeter, refreshing it weekly, creating a purifying boundary. Some women make elaborate salt patterns, intricate designs meant to confuse fairy navigation, but you keep it simple. A circle is enough. The fairies cannot cross running water, cold iron, or salt lines, or so the law claims, and while you've never tested whether fairies actually exist, you're not about to experiment with your daughter's safety. At night, you drape a red cloth over the cradle, doubling the colour protection. Red is life, blood, vitality, all things fairies envy in humans and therefore avoid in our protections. Your daughter sleeps beneath scarlet fabric embroidered with white crosses, each cross stitched while saying a prayer, each thread charged with maternal desperation and hope. Modern parents might find this excessive, but medieval motherhood is an exercise in controlled terror, and excessive precaution is the only rational response to the endless ways a baby can be lost. You never leave the baby alone in the house, even for a moment. If you must step outside, you take her with you, wrapped against your chest, or you ensure another adult is present. An unguarded baby is an invitation to theft. The fairies are said to work quickly, swooping in during the brief seconds a mother turns her back, making the switch before she even realizes anything has happened. Some women report a sudden cold breeze, or a feeling of presence just before discovering their baby has changed. You felt such breezes on occasion, and immediately checked your daughter, running your hands over her familiar body, staring into her eyes for any hint of otherness, finding nothing wrong but unable to shake the anxiety. There's a test. If you suspect a changeling, you're supposed to do something absurd in front of the creature. Brew beer in an eggshell, for instance, or bake bread in a thimble. And the changeling, being ancient despite its infant appearance, will be so startled it will speak, revealing its true nature. but the test itself seems cruel, and besides, what do you do if it works? If your baby suddenly speaks with an ancient voice, confirming your worst fears, how do you cope with that knowledge? Better to prevent the switch in the first place than to confirm it afterward. Your daughter stirs, making the small snuffling sounds that precede waking, and you lean over the cradle, checking the scissors, touching the iron horseshoe, ensuring all protections remain in place. She opens her eyes, brown like yours, with no hint of the unnatural gold or silver that supposedly marks fairy blood, and you lift her, holding her close, breathing in her scent. She's yours. She's human. She's safe. For today at least, the fairies have not succeeded. The ceiling above your head is a forest of dried plants, each bundle hanging from the blackened beams like strange fruit, and while some are certainly meant for cooking, most serve more mysterious purposes. You've been accumulating these herbs for years, gathering them on specific days, drying them with particular prayers, positioning them according to traditions so old nobody remembers their origins. These bundles are your household's first line of defense against misfortunes that range from the mundane to the catastrophic, and you know each one's purpose as intimately as you know your own children. Rosemary hangs above the main door, and not just because it smells pleasant. Rosemary is for remembrance, yes, but more practically it's for protection against forgetfulness caused by fairy enchantment. A husband who wanders out one morning and doesn't return, who's found 3 days later with no memory of where he's been. Rosemary might have prevented that. It also wards against nightmares, particularly the kind where you wake up unable to move, feeling a weight on your chest. Historians have documented sleep paralysis across centuries, and the medieval explanation involves demons or hags sitting on sleepers' chests. Rosemary smoke or rosemary hung above the bed supposedly keeps these entities at bay. Next to the rosemary, there's a bundle of mugwort, gathered at midsummer and dried in complete darkness to preserve its prophetic properties. Mugwort grants true dreams, the kind that show you the future or reveal hidden knowledge. You've tucked sprigs into your pillow on occasion, and while you can't say the dreams that followed were genuinely prophetic, they were certainly vivid. You dreamed once of finding coins in the garden, and the next day you actually did find 3 pennies near the carrots, which either proves mugwort's power or simply shows that you'd seen the coins earlier without consciously registering them. Either way, the mugwort stays. St. John's wort hangs above every window, its yellow flowers long faded to brown, but its power supposedly intact. This herb is specific protection against lightning strikes, which might seem like an odd concern until you remember that thatched roofs and open hearth fires make every cottage a potential torch waiting for the right spark. Lightning is considered God's weapon against evil, but it's indiscriminate, and a house struck by lightning is assumed to harbour some sin or wickedness. You're confident your household is reasonably virtuous, but confident isn't the same as certain, so the St. John's wort stays up, just in case God needs a reminder to direct his wrath elsewhere. Historians still argue whether these herbs actually provided any practical protection. St. John's wort certainly doesn't affect lightning's electrical properties, but the psychological comfort of feeling protected might have kept people calmer during storms, preventing panicked mistakes. Or maybe, in some cases, the herb's strong smells actually did repel certain insects or small animals, and this observable benefit got generalized into broad protective powers. You don't know and don't particularly care. If it works, the mechanism's irrelevant. There's a bundle you don't talk about openly, tucked behind a beam where visitors won't notice it. Black cohosh, gathered under a waning moon, and dried with your face turned away from it. This herb is for women's troubles. the kind that sometimes need resolving without a pregnancy coming to term. You've never used it yourself, but you know how to prepare it if a desperate neighbour ever asks, and having it available feels like wielding a small, secret power in a world where women have so little control over their bodies. The Church would condemn this knowledge, the herb itself, the very idea of interfering with conception, but the Church Fathers don't bear children, or bury babies who arrive too early, or watch women die from bearing their 10th child. You keep the herb, and you keep the knowledge, and you keep silent. Garlic hangs in braided ropes, and yes, it's wonderful in cooking, but it's also ferociously protective. Vampires aren't really discussed in your region. That's more of a concern in the Slavic territories, but evil spirits in general despise garlic, and you're happy to deploy it against whatever malevolent forces might be lurking. You rub garlic on the doorpost during certain times of the year, particularly around All Hallows Eve when the barrier between the living and dead grows thin. The house reeks for days afterward, but you sleep better knowing that nothing dead or undead is likely to cross a threshold slick with garlic juice. Bay leaves are tucked into the rafters above the hearth, and you burn one occasionally when the house feels heavy or unlucky. Bay smoke purifies the air spiritually, or so you believe, though it also just smells nice, which might be accomplishing the same thing through different means. You've noticed that burning bay leaves seems to improve your husband's mood, and whether that's supernatural intervention or simply pleasant aromatherapy doesn't particularly matter. A happier husband is a practical blessing regardless of the mechanism. There's fennel hanging near the dairy corner of the cottage, because fennel protects milk products from souring and prevents cheese from being stolen by fairies. The fairy cheese theft situation might sound absurd, but you've absolutely had cheese go bad faster than it should, and blaming fairies is more satisfying than blaming your own inadequate temperature control or the bacterial contamination you don't know exists. Besides, the fennel does seem to help. The cheese lasts longer with fennel present, and whether that's because fennel has mild antimicrobial properties or because the fairies are genuinely deterred, the result is the same: less wasted cheese. Vervain hangs in a small bundle near your bed, gathered with your left hand at dawn and never allowed to touch the ground during harvesting. Vervain is complicated. It can promote love, protect against enchantment, reveal truth, and supposedly make you irresistible to your husband. You're not entirely sure which of these effects you were aiming for when you hung it, but it's been there for 4 years, and your marriage is stable, so you're not removing it. Some scholars suggest vervain was sacred to ancient goddesses, and its powers are remnants of pre-Christian worship, awkwardly absorbed into Christian folk practice, but you're simply grateful for any help keeping a marriage functional in a world where divorce is impossible and domestic unhappiness is eternal. Yarrow bundles hang near the door because yarrow stanches bleeding and drives away evil in equal measure. You've actually used yarrow practically. Crushed fresh and applied to cuts, it does seem to help clotting, so this is one herb where folk belief and actual medical efficacy align. Of course, you still attribute its healing power to supernatural virtue rather than chemical properties, but the outcome is identical. Your children know to grab yarrow if they scrape a knee, and whether they're treating the wound medically or magically, the bleeding stops, and that's what matters. Hawthorn is conspicuously absent from your ceiling garden, because bringing hawthorn into the house invites death. Hawthorn is sacred to fairies, marks their dwelling places, and should never cross a human threshold. You gather it for external uses. Hawthorn wreaths hung on the outer door at Beltane for protection, but inside the house, never. Your neighbour once brought hawthorn in during a bouquet arrangement, not thinking, and her mother died 3 weeks later. Coincidence, obviously, but a coincidence nobody wants to repeat. You survey your hanging forest with satisfaction, this pharmacy and armory combined, these humble plants enlisted as soldiers in your ongoing war against misfortune. Modern medicine will eventually explain some of their properties, dismiss others as pure superstition, but standing here in the herb-scented dimness of your cottage, you know one truth. These bundles represent generations of women's accumulated wisdom, their observations and experiments and desperate hopes. If your great-great-grandmother believed that mugwort brought true dreams and rosemary guarded sleep, who are you to dismiss her experience? She survived to old age using these herbs. You plan to do the same. The chickens are perhaps the most underestimated prophets in your household, and you've learned to read their behavior with the same attention a scholar gives to ancient texts. These feathered creatures pecking around your yard aren't just providing eggs and eventual meat. They're offering constant commentary on the household's future, broadcasting warnings and predictions through their laying patterns, their vocalizations, and their inexplicable behavioral quirks. You check the coop every morning with a mixture of hope and dread, never quite sure what messages the chickens have left for you overnight. Egg count matters tremendously, but it's the odd numbers that carry significance. A hen laying exactly one egg is normal, boring, prophetically silent. But a hen laying 3 eggs in a single day, which shouldn't be physically possible but occasionally happens, means visitors are coming, specifically 3 of them, and you'd better prepare extra food and clean the good linens. You've tested this prediction over the years and found it eerily accurate, though it's possible you're simply more likely to have visitors during times when the chickens are well fed and productive for unrelated seasonal reasons. Correlation and causation tangle together in the chicken coop like they do everywhere else in medieval life. A hen laying 5 eggs over the course of a week means prosperity, abundance, the household thriving. 7 eggs from one hen in 7 days is almost suspiciously perfect and suggests divine favour or at least extremely good luck. But odd numbers in a single day are the real predictors. You found 2 eggs from one hen yesterday, which is normal, but this morning there are 3, and you're already mentally calculating whether you have enough bread and cheese for unexpected guests. The real concern is when a hen lays a misshapen egg, wrinkled, overly small, or worst of all, soft-shelled and membrane only. These eggs are omens of illness, particularly in children. A soft egg means a child will become soft with fever, weak and pliable, and possibly dying. You found exactly 2 soft eggs in your years of chicken keeping, and both times a child in the village fell ill within days. Your own children, thankfully, were spared, but you'd sacrificed those hens immediately, refusing to keep birds that laid such ominous prophecies. Double-yolked eggs are controversial in their meaning. Some women insist they predict twins, either for the household or for someone nearby. Others claim they foretell a wedding. 2 things joined that should be separate, like 2 people joining in marriage. You found double-yolked eggs preceded both your neighbour's twin pregnancy and your cousin's sudden betrothal, so you're inclined to believe both interpretations are valid, or the egg simply means doubling, and context determines what gets doubled. Blood spots in eggs are universally bad news. Someone will shed blood through injury or violence or childbirth complications. You crack each egg carefully into a separate bowl before adding it to your cooking, checking for these crimson omens. Most eggs are clean, but perhaps 1 in 20 shows a small blood spot, and you've learned to note the date and watch for accidents. Your son cut his hand badly with a scythe 3 days after you found a blood-spotted egg, and while he might have had that accident anyway, you'll never know. The egg warned you, and you failed to prevent the outcome. which haunts you more than if you'd had no warning at all. Then there's the rooster's behaviour, which is its own form of divination. A rooster crowing at noon, well outside his normal dawn announcements, means a death is approaching the village. Not necessarily your household, but somewhere nearby, someone is marked. Historians have documented this belief across multiple European cultures, with some suggesting that roosters crowing at odd times actually reflects disrupted sleep patterns from stress or illness in the flock, and humans might unconsciously notice other signs of community illness that they attribute to the rooster's prophecy. But you just know that when your rooster crowed at midday last month, the blacksmith's father died that evening, and the connection seems too precise to be coincidental. A rooster crowing while standing on your doorstep is a more personal message. Someone is coming to your door with important news. Good or bad, the rooster doesn't specify, but his presence at the threshold means change is arriving. You shoo him away when this happens, as if dispersing the messenger might disperse the message, but it never works. The news always comes. Hens that crow like roosters are deeply unsettling and traditionally require immediate culling. A crowing hen is nature reversed, the feminine adopting masculine traits, and this inversion predicts disaster, rebellion in the household, a wife dominating her husband in unnatural ways, children disobeying parents, the whole social order threatening to collapse. You've never had a crowing hen, thankfully, but your grandmother did, and she killed it immediately, wrung its neck with her own hands despite the waste of a good-laying bird. Better to lose one chicken than risk the chaos a crowing hen supposedly heralds. Chickens refusing to roost at night is another warning sign. They should naturally return to the coop at dusk, settling onto their perches for the night, but sometimes they cluster outside instead, huddled together on the ground, refusing to enter. This behaviour means the coop has become spiritually contaminated, possibly housing an evil presence. You've experienced this once, and after much searching you found a dead rat decomposing in the corner. The chickens had sensed death and decay and refused to sleep near it. Was their refusal supernatural sensitivity or just superior sense of smell? The distinction hardly matters when the practical result is the same. Trust the chicken's judgment. A hen pecking at the window is trying to tell you something, though interpreting what requires observation of context. If she's pecking persistently, staring inside, she might be warning of fire risk. Check the hearth. Make sure sparks are contained. If she pecks and then runs away, she's alerting you to predators near the coop. Foxes, weasels, hawks. You've learned to investigate whenever a hen comes to the window, and you've prevented several disasters this way. Though whether the hen was genuinely communicating or just exhibiting odd behaviour that prompted you to be more vigilant is unclear. The colour of egg supposedly correlates with fortune too. Brown eggs are standard, boring, neutral. But occasionally a hen lays an unusually pale egg, almost white, and this predicts sorrow or loss. Very dark eggs, approaching chocolate brown, suggest incoming abundance. You've noticed your best layer produces darker eggs in spring when she's healthiest, and paler eggs in winter when feed is scarce, so there might be a prosaic explanation linking egg colour to hen health, to seasonal prosperity. But you prefer the magical interpretation. It makes the chickens feel like active participants in household fortune, rather than passive victims of seasonal change. Historians still argue about whether chicken divination represents genuine pattern recognition. Humans noticing correlations between chicken behaviour and subsequent events, or whether it's pure apophenia, seeing meaningful patterns in random noise. From your perspective, the chickens have warned you of visitors, illness, accidents, and deaths, with enough consistency that dismissing their prophecies seems foolish. Whether they're truly oracular, or whether you're unconsciously better prepared and more observant after receiving their warnings doesn't ultimately matter. The chickens give signs, you heed the signs, your household survives. That's a system that works, regardless of the mechanism behind it. You wake this morning with the familiar heaviness in your belly, the dull ache in your lower back, and you know immediately what day it is in your monthly cycle. This knowledge fills you with a complicated mixture of relief. You're not pregnant again, thank God. And dread, because for the next several days you're spiritually contaminated, a walking source of corruption that can spoil food, curdle milk, and ruin months of careful preservation work with a single touch. The superstitions surrounding menstruation are so extensive, so all-encompassing, that you've essentially memorized a second set of household rules that apply only during these bleeding days. First and most critical, you cannot touch any preserved foods. The jars of pickled vegetables lining the shelf, the salted meat hanging in the larder, the wheels of cheese aging in the cool cellar, all of these are forbidden to you. Your touch while you're bleeding will cause them to spoil instantly. Not gradually, not over time, but immediately, as if your menstrual blood carries a spiritual poison that seeps through your skin into whatever you handle. You've heard stories of women who forgot this rule, who touched their carefully preserved winter stores while menstruating, and watched an entire season's food preparation turn mouldy and rotten within days. The scientific explanation that won't exist for centuries involves bacteria and pH levels, and the fact that menstrual blood actually has no supernatural properties whatsoever. But you're working with medieval understanding where blood is power, female blood is mysterious, and menstrual blood specifically is potent and dangerous. Historians have documented menstrual taboos across virtually every human culture, with the specific prohibitions varying but the underlying anxiety remaining constant. Menstruating women are powerful in ways that threaten the domestic order. Butter churning is absolutely prohibited during your courses. You've tested this, not intentionally, but through forgetting, and the butter simply wouldn't form. You churned for 2 hours, your arms aching, the cream sloshing endlessly without ever coalescing into butter. Your neighbour, not bleeding, took over the same churn and had butter within 15 minutes. Coincidence? Perhaps the churning technique matters more than anyone realizes. Perhaps your frustration and physical discomfort affected your rhythm. Perhaps menstrual fatigue genuinely impacts the physical labor required. Or perhaps menstrual blood really does prevent butter formation through mysterious means. You've stopped trying to understand it and simply hand the churn to someone else during your bleeding days. Bread baking while menstruating is similarly forbidden, though the consequences are less immediate. Bread touched by menstruating hands will rise poorly, bake unevenly, and taste slightly off. Not enough to be inedible, but enough to be noticeably wrong. You've assigned bread baking to your eldest daughter during your monthly courses, teaching her the techniques she'll need when she starts bleeding herself. This transfer of responsibility is practical skill building, disguised as superstitious avoidance, and you're grateful for traditions that create space for teaching. Wine and beer are particularly vulnerable to menstrual contamination. A menstruating woman walking past fermenting ale can supposedly sour the entire batch, even without touching it. Her mere presence, her spiritual state, her bleeding body's emanations are enough to disrupt the fermentation process. You stay away from your husband's brewing area during these days, circling wide around the barrels, holding your breath if you must pass nearby. He's invested significant time and resources into each batch, and you refuse to be the cause of its failure. the garden presents complicated questions. Some traditions claim menstruating women kill plants with their touch, that seedlings wilt and fruit drops from trees if a bleeding woman walks too close. Other traditions insist the opposite, that menstrual blood is fertilizing, powerful, that burying menstrual rags in the garden ensures abundant crops. You've heard both claims from women you trust, and you've split the difference. You avoid the garden during the heaviest flow days but return cautiously toward the end of your courses, reasoning that diminishing blood means diminishing power for good or evil. You're also forbidden from participating in any religious ceremonies while bleeding. The Church is clear on this. Menstruating women are unclean, spiritually polluted, and their presence in sacred space is offensive to God. You don't take communion, don't attend Mass if you can avoid it, and if you must attend, you stay at the very back, as far from the altar as possible. This enforced exclusion stings more than the domestic prohibitions, because it frames your natural bodily function as sinful, as something shameful that separates you from divine grace. Historians still argue whether these menstrual taboos represent male anxiety about female reproductive power, men creating rules to contain and control something they don't understand, or whether they reflect women's own strategies for obtaining regular rest and relief from labor. Perhaps being forbidden from heavy work during menstruation is actually a cultural mechanism ensuring women get necessary recovery time in a world where they otherwise work ceaselessly. You're not sure which interpretation is correct, but you're grateful for the excuse to rest, even if it comes wrapped in shame. Your husband knows to avoid sexual relations during your bleeding, not just because the Church forbids it, but because conception during menstruation supposedly produces deformed or evil children. Children conceived while their mother bleeds will be born with red hair, considered a mark of witchcraft and bad temperament, or birthmarks, or worse. You've been married long enough that your husband can read the signs even before you announce them, and he keeps his distance without needing explicit reminders. The worst part of these bleeding days isn't the prohibition on work, that's actually somewhat restful, but the isolation. You're separated from normal household rhythms, unable to participate fully in daily life, marked as other and dangerous. You eat separately sometimes, using dishes that will be washed more thoroughly. You sleep on special linens that can be boiled afterward. You're treated as contaminated, and while you understand the reasoning, while you follow the rules because the consequences of breaking them seem too severe to risk, there's a loneliness in being cast out from your own life for several days each month. Modern medicine will eventually reveal that menstrual blood is just blood, that it carries no magical properties, that women are no more or less capable during menstruation than any other time. But that knowledge is centuries away, and standing here in your medieval kitchen, staring at the butter churn you're forbidden to touch, you can only work within the understanding you have. The blood makes you powerful and dangerous, sacred and unclean, and you'll navigate these contradictions as women always have, carefully, resentfully, and with the knowledge that in a few days the bleeding will stop, and you'll be welcomed back into the household centre, at least until the moon turns again and the cycle repeats. Death has visited a house 3 doors down. Old Thomas the Cooper finally succumbed to the cough that's been rattling his chest all winter, and before his body is even fully cold, his wife is moving through the rooms with frantic purpose, covering every reflective surface in the house. You're there to help, as neighbours do, and you're draping dark cloth over the polished metal plates, the water basin, even the small hand mirror that was Thomas's pride. This isn't mourning decoration. This is spiritual emergency response, because mirrors and death are a catastrophically dangerous combination. The belief is universal and urgent. A soul freshly separated from its body is confused, disoriented, searching for familiar anchor points. If that wandering soul encounters its own reflection, or worse, if a living person's reflection appears in a mirror in a room where someone has died, the soul can become trapped in the glass, unable to move on to whatever comes next. You've heard stories of mirrors in death rooms that subsequently show strange shadows, movement where no one stands, faces that aren't quite right. These haunted mirrors must be destroyed, buried at crossroads, or sealed away forever, because a soul trapped in glass is tormented, and tormented souls make for dangerous hauntings. But there's another concern, equally pressing. If a living person looks into a mirror in a death room, they might see death itself looking back, and meeting death's gaze is an invitation, a marking. You'll be the next to die, claimed by the very reflection that should show only yourself. Your neighbour's daughter started to glance at the water bucket, its surface mirror calm, and you physically grabbed her shoulder and turned her away. She's only 12, too young to understand these dangers, too young to die because of a moment's carelessness. You cover the windows too, drawing heavy curtains even though it's midday, because glass is glass and reflections are reflections. Some traditions insist only mirrors need covering, but why risk the distinction? Thomas's soul needs clear passage out of this world, and you're going to provide it, eliminating every possible trap or detour. The room becomes dark, cave-like, lit only by candles that cast no betraying reflections. Historians have documented mirror-covering practices across European, Jewish, and other cultural traditions, with variations in duration. Some families keep mirrors covered for 3 days, others for a full week, some until after the funeral. The explanations vary too: protecting the soul, preventing bad luck, avoiding vanity during mourning, or simply marking the household as one in grief. You're covering these mirrors for a full 7 days because Thomas was a good man and deserves every protection you can offer, even in death. The body itself presents its own superstitious requirements. Thomas must lie with his feet pointing toward the door, providing his soul with a clear directional path outward. His arms are crossed over his chest, hands positioned carefully because if they fall open, it means he's reaching for someone, beckoning the next death. You've weighted his hands with smooth stones to keep them in place, an old trick that works better than simply folding them and hoping. His eyes are closed, thank God, because eyes that won't stay shut mean the deceased is looking for someone to accompany him to the afterlife. You've heard of bodies whose eyes kept opening no matter how many times they were pressed shut, and in those cases the family places coins on the eyelids. The weight keeps them closed, and the coins serve as payment for the ferryman, a belief so ancient it predates Christianity entirely. Thomas's eyes stayed peacefully shut, suggesting he's ready to go alone, which is a relief to everyone. The windows, before you curtained them, were opened immediately upon Thomas's death, allowing his soul to escape. Some traditions insist the soul leaves through the mouth, others through the top of the head, but everyone agrees it needs an exit route. A soul trapped in a sealed house becomes confused and vengeful, rattling around the rooms, disturbing the living, unable to find peace. You opened every window and door in the cottage for exactly 15 minutes, timing it carefully, then closed everything to prevent other spirits from entering the vacancy Thomas's departure created. Stopping all the clocks in the house is your responsibility, and you've moved through the rooms, turning back hands, stopping pendulums, creating a pocket of timelessness. Time stopped for Thomas at the moment of death, and the household's clocks must acknowledge this, must pause in respect. Some people believe that failing to stop the clocks means the family's time is also running out, that death will return soon for another household member. You're not taking chances. The clocks will remain stopped until after the burial, then will be restarted simultaneously, marking the household's return to normal time. There's a covered dish of salt placed on Thomas's chest, and you've positioned it carefully, checking that it won't slide off. The salt serves multiple purposes. It's purifying, it's preserving, and it's supposedly absorbing the sins of the deceased. Some traditions involve a sin eater, a poor soul paid to eat bread and drink ale placed on the corpse, literally consuming the dead person's sins so they can enter heaven clean. Your region doesn't practice sin eating anymore. The church discouraged it as blasphemous, as if humans could actually transfer sin through baked goods. But the salt remains, doing its mysterious work. Bread in the house must be turned upside down, a reversal marking the household's inverted state. You're living in the presence of death, normal rules are suspended, and physical symbols of this suspension help maintain awareness. You've also emptied all standing water and refilled it fresh, because water in a death house absorbs the spiritual disturbance and becomes unsafe for drinking. Whether this has any basis in reality, or whether it's purely symbolic, you're grateful for the excuse to ensure clean water during a stressful time. Historians still argue whether these death rituals serve primarily psychological functions, giving the bereaved concrete actions to perform, creating structure during chaos, or whether they reflect genuine belief in souls, spirits, and supernatural mechanics. You're not contemplating theory right now. You're making sure Thomas's widow won't be haunted by her husband's confused ghost for the rest of her life. The wake will last 3 days, with neighbours taking turns sitting with the body, ensuring Thomas is never alone until burial. This practice serves the practical purpose of confirming death. In an era before reliable medical verification, a 3-day wake ensures the person is truly deceased and not merely comatose. But it also serves the spiritual purpose of guiding and guarding the soul during its vulnerable transition. You'll take a shift tomorrow night, sitting in the candle-lit dimness with Thomas's sheeted form, praying or telling stories or simply being present. After the burial, the death room will need to be thoroughly cleansed. Walls washed with salt water, floors scrubbed, all linens boiled, herbs burned to purify the air. The mirrors can be uncovered, the clocks restarted, the windows open to let in fresh air and sunlight. The household will slowly return to normal, though Thomas's absence will remain a permanent alteration. But at least his soul will have moved on cleanly, without entanglement, without creating a haunting that would make the cottage uninhabitable. You finish covering the last mirror, securing the cloth with pins, and step back. The room is properly prepared now, a liminal space between life and death, a way station for a departing soul. Thomas lies peacefully in the centre of it all, and you hope, you genuinely hope, that wherever he's going, the path is clear and the journey is easy. The mirrors will keep their secrets, the soul will find its way, and the living will continue their endless work of managing the boundary between this world and whatever lies beyond. The spinning wheel sits in the corner like a sleeping animal, and you approach it with the same caution you'd use approaching anything that might bite, because spinning is perhaps the most supernaturally charged domestic task you perform, even more than baking or washing, and the rules governing when and how you can spin are so elaborate that you sometimes wonder if the thread you're producing is actual fibre or somehow woven from pure concentrated tradition and anxiety. Friday spinning is absolutely forbidden, and this prohibition has teeth sharper than the laundry rules. To spin on Friday is to spin Christ's burial shroud, to participate in his death, to literally create the fabric of mortality. Women who spin on Friday are said to be spinning their own death shrouds, measuring out the thread of their remaining lives with each rotation of the wheel. You've never tested this rule and never will because your grandmother's cousin supposedly spun on a Friday, just once, in an emergency, needing to finish thread for a wedding dress, and she died before the month ended. The wedding dress became her burial dress, and the thread she'd spun on Friday was woven into her actual shroud. Sundays are similarly forbidden, but for different reasons. Sunday is the Lord's Day, meant for rest and worship, and working your spinning wheel on Sunday is both sacrilege and invitation to disaster. The thread spun on Sunday will be cursed, will break constantly when woven, will create fabric that tears easily and wears poorly. More than that, Sunday spinning keeps the angels from their own rest, forces them to work overtime managing your spiritual transgression, and annoyed angels are dangerous beings to have hovering around your household. But there are also auspicious days for spinning, times when the thread seems to flow from the distaff with supernatural smoothness, when the wheel turns as if guided by invisible hands. The 3 days following the new moon are particularly blessed for beginning new spinning projects. Thread started during the waxing moon grows in strength as the moon grows in light, creating fabric that's durable and long-lasting. You plan your major spinning projects around the lunar calendar, starting fresh wool or flax when the moon is a slender crescent, timing your work to harness celestial power. The thread itself carries meaning beyond its material existence. You're not just creating yarn, you're creating destiny, possibility, connection. Historians point out that spinning vocabulary pervades language. We spin stories, follow threads of thought, talk about the fabric of society, because spinning was so fundamental to human existence for so long. But you're thinking more literally and more magically. The thread you spin can be used for binding spells, for protection charms, for love magic. Red thread, spun on a Tuesday, Mars's day, the day of blood and war and passion, and tied around a young man's wrist will make him fall in love with you. You did this once before you were married, spinning crimson wool on a Tuesday evening, whispering the name of the boy you favoured with each turn of the wheel, then accidentally brushing against him at the market while the thread was concealed in your palm, leaving a small piece tucked into his sleeve. Did it work? Well, you did marry him, though whether that was due to thread magic or simply persistent flirtation and fortunate timing is impossible to determine. The thread certainly didn't hurt. Black thread spun on a Saturday, Saturn's day, the day of binding and limitation, can be used for curses, for restraining enemies, for protecting against theft. You've spun black thread exactly twice, both times with specific intention. Once to bind a neighbour who was spreading vicious gossip about your family, once to prevent a thief who'd been stealing from garden plots. In both cases, you knotted the thread with precise intent, buried it at a crossroads, and spoke words you won't repeat. Did the gossip stop? Eventually. Was the thief caught? Yes, actually, 3 weeks later. Correlation, causation, or coincidence? You've stopped trying to distinguish them. Knotted thread is its own category of magic. Each knot can trap intention, seal power, bind or release energy. You're knotting thread right now, preparing a length of white yarn for a protection charm. 3 knots for the Holy Trinity, 9 knots for completion, 13 knots for the full lunar cycle. The number of knots matters tremendously, and you count carefully, whispering prayers or intentions with each tie. This particular thread will be sewn into a baby's christening gown, the knots holding protective blessings close to the infant's body. But there are dangers in knotted thread too. Thread knotted with malicious intent can bind someone's fertility, prevent conception, cause impotence. You've heard whispered stories of women finding knotted threads hidden under their marriage beds, curses placed by rivals or disapproving mothers-in-law, and the discovery of such threads requires immediate countermeasures, burning them while reciting protective prayers, or untying each knot while visualizing the curse dissolving. You check under your own bed periodically just to be certain, and you've found nothing yet, but the possibility lurks. Spinning wheels themselves can be haunted or blessed depending on their history. A wheel that belonged to a happy spinner produces better thread than one that belonged to a miserable woman. The emotional residue supposedly transfers into the fibre. You inherited your wheel from your mother, who was generally content, and you found it cooperative and smooth. Your neighbour has a wheel she bought from a widow's estate, and she swears it's sullen, difficult, prone to breaking thread at crucial moments. Whether this is mechanical difference or spiritual contamination is debatable, but she's planning to trade it for a different one, preferably one with happier provenance. You must never let the wheel sit completely idle for extended periods, because an unused wheel attracts negative spirits who spin their own dark threads during the night. You keep a bit of wool on the distaff always, even when you're not actively spinning, and you give the wheel a few turns every day, maintaining its activity and purpose. An active wheel is a protected wheel, a wheel that remembers its function and resists supernatural interference. Thread broken during spinning has meaning too. If thread snaps unexpectedly while you're working, examine where the break occurred. A break near the beginning of the thread means interrupted beginnings, projects that won't complete, plans that will fail. A break in the middle suggests obstacles halfway through endeavours. A break near the end, just before completion, is particularly frustrating but also instructive. Success is close, but final achievement requires additional effort or different approach. The direction you spin matters as well. You spin clockwise, following the sun's path, creating thread that's strengthening, building, positive. Counterclockwise spinning, Widdishins again, that word that means against the natural order, creates thread suitable only for curse work and banishing magic. You've never spun Widdishins deliberately, though you've occasionally lost focus and accidentally reversed direction for a few turns, and you immediately unspun that thread and started over, refusing to let backwards thread mix with forwards thread. Historians still argue whether spinning superstitions reflect practical wisdom, encoded in supernatural terms, like how spinning during certain weather conditions might actually affect fibre quality, and lunar cycles correlate with humidity levels, or whether they're purely magical thinking. You don't particularly care. The wheel turns, the thread forms, and the accumulated wisdom of generations guides your hands. Whether that guidance is supernatural or simply traditional, the thread is strong, the fabric is durable, and your family is clothed. The mechanism is less important than the result, and the result you think with satisfaction as you examine your evening's work is quite good indeed. Night is falling, and you're performing the elaborate ritual that stands between you and restful sleep, because the bedchamber is where you're most vulnerable, where consciousness loosens its grip and supernatural forces can slip through the cracks. Nightmares aren't just bad dreams in the medieval understanding, they're actual entities, malevolent beings that ride sleeping bodies, suffocate breath, and steal vitality. The word itself reveals this. Nightmare, the nightmare, a female demon horse that gallops across your chest while you sleep paralyzed and terrified. You've experienced this phenomenon yourself, waking unable to move or scream, while pressure crushes your ribs and you're determined to prevent it from happening again. The first line of defense is shoe placement, and you're arranging your shoes with the precision of a military strategist. They must be placed under the bed with the toes pointing away from the headboard, creating arrows that point any invading spirits back toward the door and away from your sleeping body. Shoes placed with toes pointing inward invite spirits closer, practically beckoning them to climb into bed with you. You've heard of people who woke with inexplicable bruises, strange marks, or profound exhaustion after their shoes were positioned incorrectly, and you check your placement twice before moving on to the next protection. Your husband, already in bed, thinks this is excessive, but he doesn't stop you because the one night you skipped the shoe ritual you woke screaming from a nightmare so vivid it took hours to shake off, and he's not eager to repeat that experience. Historians will eventually explain sleep paralysis as a neurological phenomenon involving REM sleep, muscle atonia, and hypnagogic hallucinations, but that knowledge is centuries away. Right now, you're working with demons and spirits, and shoes are weaponry. Under your pillow goes a small cloth bag you've prepared with careful attention. Dried lavender for peaceful sleep, mugwort for prophetic rather than nightmarish dreams, a sprig of rosemary for protection, and 3 hawthorn thorns arranged in a triangle. The hawthorn is risky. You'd never bring hawthorn into the house for general purposes, but thorns under the pillow serve a specific protective function, creating a painful barrier that nightmares can't cross. The triangle shape is sacred geometry, a stable form that resists chaos. You've sewn this sachet yourself using white thread for purity, knotting it 9 times for completion. The bed frame itself has been prepared. You've carved small crosses into the wood at each corner, marks invisible to casual observation but spiritually active. You've also tucked sprigs of St. John's wort into the joints where the frame connects, and you've hung a small bag of salt from one of the bedposts. This bed is a fortress, and you've fortified it layer by layer, protection upon protection, because night terrors are no small thing. There's a knife under the mattress, iron blade facing the door. Iron repels fairies and demons alike, and a blade is both weapon and symbolic severer of unwanted connections. You'd never sleep on a knife edge. That would invite violence and injury, but a knife positioned safely beneath provides security. Your husband doesn't know about the knife. He'd probably object on practical safety grounds. But you know it's there, and the knowledge alone helps you sleep. The bedroom door must remain slightly ajar, never fully closed and never fully open. A closed door traps bad dreams inside the room with you, giving them nowhere to escape. A fully open door invites wandering spirits to enter freely. But a door left 6 inches ajar provides just enough opening for nightmares to exit, while being narrow enough to discourage casual spirit traffic. You've calibrated this opening through years of experience, and you adjust the door to precisely the right width before climbing into bed. Prayers are essential, and you've got a specific bedtime prayer that your mother taught you, that her mother taught her, going back through generations of anxious women bargaining with the divine for peaceful sleep. The words are a mixture of formal Latin prayer and folk additions. Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, bless the bed that I lie on. 4 corners to my bed, 4 angels round my head, 1 to watch and 1 to pray, and 2 to bear my soul away. That last line always troubles you slightly. Why would angels be bearing your soul away unless you're dying? But you recite it anyway because tradition demands it. You also recite a personal addition, words you've developed yourself. Let no nightmare ride my chest. Let no demon steal my rest. Let my sleep be deep and sound. safe within this sacred ground. It rhymes, which supposedly gives it power, and the repetition of let creates a pattern of permission and prohibition. You're granting permission for good sleep while forbidding interference, using language as a protective spell. There's also the matter of sleeping position. You must never sleep with your arms crossed over your chest, because that's the position of the dead, and sleeping like a corpse invites death to claim you. You've trained yourself to sleep on your side, arms bent naturally, avoiding any pose that might be mistaken for final rest. Your husband sprawls on his back, arms wherever they fall, seemingly unconcerned with these precautions, and you've given up trying to convince him. Men, you've noticed, tend to be less worried about supernatural bedroom threats, possibly because they're not socialized to constant vigilance the way women are. The cat is allowed in the bedroom because cats see spirits and will alert you to any presence you can't perceive. She's currently curled at the foot of the bed, purring, which is a good sign. A cat refusing to enter the bedroom, or a cat staring fixedly at empty corners, hissing at nothing visible. These would be serious warnings. But tonight she's relaxed, and you take comfort in her calm. You've also ensured that no mirrors are visible from the bed, because seeing your reflection while in the vulnerable state between waking and sleeping can separate your soul from your body. Mirrors are portals, thresholds, dangerous liminal spaces, and you keep the small hand mirror turned face down on the chest in the corner, safely distant and neutralized. Moonlight is complicated. Some traditions say moonlight on a sleeper's face causes madness, hence lunacy, from Luna the moon. Other traditions claim moonlight is protective, a blessing from the celestial realm. You've compromised by positioning the bed so moonlight might touch your feet, but never your face, hedging your bets between competing beliefs. Do you remember the bread omens from this morning? The smooth rising loaves suggested peaceful days ahead, and you're hoping that prediction extends to peaceful nights as well. Everything is connected in the web of household superstition. Morning bread informs evening sleep. Chicken prophecies relate to dream quality, and your success at navigating one set of supernatural rules hopefully grants you favor in navigating others. You're finally settled, surrounded by your layers of protection, breathing in lavender and rosemary, listening to your husband's breathing deepen into sleep beside you. The room is dark except for faint moonlight and the glow of banked coals in the hearth. You're as safe as careful preparation can make you, as protected as herbs and iron and prayer can provide. And yet, as you drift towards sleep, there's always that moment of vulnerability, that crossing from consciousness to unconsciousness, where anything might slip through. You've done everything right, followed every rule, deployed every protection. Now you can only hope it's enough and let sleep claim you, trusting that you'll wake in the morning unridden, untroubled, and ready to begin the whole elaborate process of managing another superstition-filled day. Morning brings small disasters, as mornings often do, and you're watching the aftermath of your husband's breakfast unfold with growing dread. He's knocked the salt cellar while reaching for bread, and precious salt, expensive, essential salt, is scattered across the table in a gleaming pile. Your heart sinks. This isn't just waste. This is a direct invitation to misfortune. Bad luck made manifest in crystalline form, and you have exactly one chance to neutralize the curse before it takes hold. You grab a pinch of the spilled salt and throw it over your left shoulder immediately, without hesitation, without thought. The left shoulder is where the devil sits, whispering temptations and waiting for opportunities to cause harm. The spilled salt has attracted his attention, salt being precious, and its waste being sinful, but throwing salt directly at him, even unknowingly, drives him back. Your husband watches this performance with mild amusement. He's seen you do it dozens of times. But you're not performing for him. You're performing for invisible forces that care deeply about salt and shoulders and the proper management of household accidents. Historians have traced the spilled salt superstition back centuries, with some suggesting it originates from salt's historical value, when salt was literally worth its weight in silver. Spilling it was genuine economic disaster, and the bad luck was purely financial. Others point to Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper, where Judas is depicted having just knocked over a salt cellar, linking spilled salt to betrayal and misfortune. You don't know the origin story. You just know that spilled salt means 13 years of bad luck unless properly countered, and you're not about to test whether that's metaphorical or literal. The bread situation is worse. Your husband has dropped a slice, and naturally, because the universe has a sense of humour, it's landed butter side down on the floor. This is catastrophically bad news. Bread landing butter side down means the day will go wrong in every possible way, means plans will fail, means accidents and arguments and general misery. You're staring at the butter-smeared floor, calculating whether there's any way to spin this into a positive omen, and coming up empty. The only counter-curse you know involves immediately kissing the bread before picking it up, acknowledging its sacred nature and apologizing for the disrespect of dropping it. Your husband has already bent to retrieve it, but you stop him, kneel down yourself, and press your lips briefly to the butter side of the bread while whispering, "Forgive the waste, bless the day." He definitely thinks you're ridiculous now, but you don't care. The bread is holy. Body of Christ in communion, staff of life in daily existence, and treating it with reverence after an accident might convince whatever powers govern butter side down bread to show mercy. You salvage what you can of the bread, cutting away the floor-touch section and giving the rest to the chickens. Nothing that has touched the floor can be eaten by humans without spiritual risk, but animals are less vulnerable to these contaminations. The chickens, as usual, have no opinions about the supernatural implications of their breakfast and eat enthusiastically. Later in the morning, disaster strikes the hearth. You've been carefully maintaining the fire, adding fuel gradually, keeping it steady for cooking. But you've miscalculated somewhere, or the wood was damper than you thought, and the fire dies completely. The coals go grey and cold, and you're staring at dead ash where a living flame should be. This is serious. A hearth fire that dies completely means the household's vitality is draining away, means illness or death is approaching, means you've failed in one of your most fundamental responsibilities as keeper of the home's heart. You must relight it immediately, and not with coals borrowed from a neighbour. That would be admitting your fire died and inviting gossip about your household's declining fortunes. You need to create new fire from scratch, which means the tinderbox and significant effort. You're striking flint against steel, coaxing sparks into charred cloth, breathing gently on the tiny ember, praying it catches. This process takes 15 frustrating minutes, during which you're acutely aware that every moment the hearth sits cold is a moment of vulnerability. When the fire finally catches, you feed it carefully, speaking to it like a living thing. Grow strong, burn bright, warm this home, guard this family. Some women name their hearth fires, treating them as household spirits that require acknowledgement and respect. You haven't gone quite that far, but you understand the impulse. The fire is the household's literal and metaphorical centre, and its health reflects the family's health. The bread you baked earlier has developed a crack down one side despite proper scoring. Do you remember your neighbour's cracked bread predicting marriage troubles? You're examining your own bread now, wondering what this crack means for your household. The crack is smaller than hers was, just a small split along one edge, which you're choosing to interpret as a minor disruption rather than a major crisis. Perhaps a small argument, a temporary tension, something manageable. You're mentally preparing yourself to be extra patient with your husband today, to avoid potential conflicts that might fulfill the bread's prophecy. Your daughter has spilled water on the floor, a spreading puddle that you're mopping up while calculating the meaning. Water spilled deliberately for cleaning is neutral, but water spilled accidentally is tears to come. Someone in the household will cry before nightfall. You glance at your children, wondering who and why. The toddler cries frequently anyway, so that's not much of a prediction. But if it's you who ends up crying, or your husband, that suggests genuine emotional upset ahead. The knife that was sitting safely on the table has somehow fallen to the floor, and it's landed point first, stuck vertically in the packed earth between floorboards. Your stomach drops. A falling knife that sticks point down means a man will visit, and not necessarily a welcome one. A falling fork means a woman visitor. A falling spoon means a child. But a knife, specifically a knife that lands point down with enough force to stick, suggests conflict, sharp words, possibly danger. You pull the knife free and wipe it clean, but the omen has already been cast. You'll have a male visitor today, and the interaction will likely be unpleasant. You mentally review who might come. The tax collector, the priest wanting tithes, a neighbour with a complaint. You can't prevent the visit, the knife has spoken, but you can prepare yourself emotionally for difficulty. The fire pops loudly, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney, and you interpret this as the house itself speaking. Loud pops mean arguments ahead. Gentle crackling means peaceful conversation. Today's fire is definitely popping, reinforcing the general theme of tension that seems to be building through all these small omens. You've also noticed the candle you lit this morning has been burning unevenly, the wax melting faster on one side than the other, creating a lopsided, dripping mess. An unevenly burning candle means someone is thinking of you, and the side that melts faster indicates who. If the side nearest you melts faster, you're thinking of them more than they're thinking of you. If the far side melts faster, they're thinking of you intensely. Your candle is melting almost entirely on the far side, which means someone's thoughts are directed toward you with significant energy. Given the other omens, spilled salt, butter down bread, stuck knife, you suspect these thoughts aren't particularly kind. By midday, you've accumulated a collection of minor disasters and ominous signs that collectively predict a difficult day. You could panic, or you could do what you always do. Acknowledge the omens, take reasonable precautions, and continue working. The superstitions aren't meant to paralyze you with fear. They're meant to provide warning and guidance. You've been warned. Now you navigate carefully, speak kindly, avoid unnecessary risks, and hope that your awareness of potential trouble helps you sidestep the worst of it. And honestly, if the day ends with nothing worse than a tense conversation with an unexpected male visitor, you'll count that as successful omen management. The salt is thrown, the bread is blessed, the fire is relit, and you're as prepared as careful attention to supernatural warnings can make you. The cat is washing behind her ears with unusual intensity, and you're watching this performance with resignation because it means rain is coming, probably within the hour, and you've got laundry hanging that absolutely cannot get wet. You're already moving toward the door, preparing to rush outside and gather the half-dry linens, when you notice the candles on the table are behaving strangely. The flames are sputtering and dancing despite no draught, burning with unusual brightness, and the wax is melting in peculiar patterns that demand interpretation. A candle flame that burns bright and tall means visitors are coming. Specifically, welcome visitors who bring good news. But a flame that sputters and spits means the visitors will bring trouble or gossip. Your candles are doing both simultaneously, which suggests complicated guests with mixed intentions. Perhaps relatives who mean well but bring family drama with them, or neighbours who come with helpful information wrapped in uncomfortable truths. You make a mental note to prepare extra food and brace yourself for emotional complexity. The direction the candle flame leans also carries meaning. A flame leaning toward the door means someone is about to arrive imminently. A flame leaning away from the door means someone is leaving, departing your life temporarily or permanently. Right now, your candle flame is writhing in circles, unable to choose a direction, which you interpret as uncertainty, change, things in flux. Historians might explain this as simple air currents from the hearth fire interacting with the candle, creating turbulence, but you're reading it as atmospheric indication of your day's general instability. The cat has finished her ear washing and is now sitting directly in front of the door, staring at it with focused intensity. This is perhaps the clearest omen you've received all day. Someone is approaching the house right now. You trust the cat's awareness more than your own. She can hear footsteps and sense vibrations long before human ears detect anything. Sure enough, within moments there's a knock at the door, and you're opening it to find the blacksmith's son standing there looking uncomfortable. He's brought news that the blacksmith needs to speak with your husband about a debt, which explains this morning's stuck knife, a man visiting with sharp words about money. The visit is exactly as unpleasant as predicted, though mercifully brief. Your husband agrees to settle the account by week's end, the blacksmith's son leaves, and you're mentally checking off the knife omen as fulfilled. The day's prophecies are coming true with unsettling accuracy. But now the cat is doing something new. She's turned to face the window, and her ears are flat against her head. Flat ears mean a man approaching, and you've already had your male visitor, so this suggests another is coming. But there's something else in her posture, a tension, a wariness that makes you uneasy. You move to the window and look out, seeing nothing initially, then spotting a figure in the distance walking toward the cottage. It's the priest, which means this is either very good or very bad news, and you're preparing yourself for either possibility. The cat's suspicious posture suggests bad, but you're trying to remain optimistic. Perhaps he's just making routine visits to parishioners. Perhaps he wants to discuss some church matter. Perhaps the cat is simply being a cat, and her ear position has nothing to do with the priest's intentions. The priest arrives and confirms your fears. There's been a death in the next village, and he's asking all the women to help prepare the body and the burial feast. It's not someone you knew well, but death is community business, and you're obligated to help. This explains the water spill from this morning. Tears are definitely coming, both from the grief of the bereaved family and from the general emotional weight of dealing with death. Before the priest leaves, he notices a spider crawling across your ceiling, and he comments on it with approval. Spiders are good luck, blessed creatures, and killing a spider brings tremendous misfortune. You've always let spiders live in your cottage, partly from superstition and partly from the practical recognition that they eat flies and other pests. The priest's approval reinforces your practice. A spider spinning a web in your home means money is coming, financial good fortune weaving itself into your life strand by strand. But then he notices something that makes him frown. A broom standing upright in the corner, propped against the wall. This is apparently very bad luck, and you're embarrassed you forgot this rule. A broom should always lie flat or hang from a hook, never stand upright, because an upright broom invites unwanted visitors and allows witches to curse your home more easily. The priest gently corrects you, and you immediately lay the broom flat, apologizing and feeling foolish. You've been so focused on managing major omens that you've neglected basic precautions. After the priest departs, you're gathering your things to go help with the death preparations, and you notice the bread from this morning has developed a second, larger crack. The bread is literally falling apart, coming undone, which you're trying very hard not to interpret as your household falling apart. It's just bread. It's just a structural failure of baked goods. But the symbolism is difficult to ignore, and you're mentally reviewing your family's status, checking for signs of actual crisis beneath the bread's prophetic surface. Your daughter brings you a handful of dandelions she's picked from the garden, and you accept them with mixed feelings. Dandelions brought into the house before spring is fully established can cause bedwetting in children, or so your mother claimed. But your daughter looks so proud of her offering that you can't refuse. You place the dandelions in water and position them near the window, hoping that keeping them in sunlight neutralizes any bedwetting potential. The dog begins barking outside, and you recognize the specific bark that means stranger approaching the property. This is your third male visitor prediction coming true. First the blacksmith's son, then the priest, now apparently someone else. The dog's bark is aggressive, warning rather than welcoming, which suggests this visitor is genuinely unwanted. You move to the door cautiously. It's a travelling peddler selling needles and thread and various household goods. You're not interested, but you're also superstitious about turning away peddlers too rudely because they're known to curse households that refuse them hospitality. You buy a single needle you don't need, offering him water and a piece of bread, ensuring he leaves with neutral rather than negative feelings toward your family. Hospitality to strangers is both Christian virtue and supernatural insurance, and a needle is a small price to pay for avoiding a peddler's curse. The peddler mentions as he's leaving that he saw a large flock of crows gathered in the field beyond your cottage, and crows in large numbers mean death is moving through the area. You already know about the death in the next village, so this omen is simply confirmation rather than news. But the image of crows gathering bothers you anyway. Death as a physical presence, birds marking its passage, nature itself acknowledging mortality. You finally make it outside to check the laundry, and just as the cat predicted, rain begins falling. Not a heavy storm, just a light drizzle, but enough to dampen the clothes you'd hoped would be dry by now. You're gathering everything quickly, arms full of damp fabric, mentally adding "rehang laundry tomorrow" to your endless list of tasks. The rain on your face might be tears or might be weather, and at this point in the day you're too tired to distinguish between literal and metaphorical moisture. Back inside you notice the fire has settled into a gentle, steady burn. No more popping or sparking, just calm warmth. Perhaps the day's chaos is stabilizing, the omens fulfilled, the predictions played out. You've navigated spilled salt, butter-down bread, visiting men, and gathering crows. You've managed each small disaster, acknowledged each warning, performed each counter-curse. And here's what you've learned after years of reading household omens. Sometimes the signs are accurate, sometimes they're self-fulfilling, sometimes they're pure coincidence, and most of the time you can't tell which is which. But paying attention, treating your environment as meaningful, reading the small signs your home and animals provide, this practice makes you more observant, more prepared, more engaged with the world around you. Whether the cat truly predicts rain, or whether you've simply learned to correlate cat behavior with atmospheric pressure changes, the result is the same. You bring in the laundry before it gets soaked. The weather is speaking, the household objects are commenting, and you're listening to all of it, translating the world's constant communication into actionable information that helps you survive another complicated, omen-filled day. You're not married yet in this memory, and you're standing in front of a mirror at midnight on All Hallows Eve, holding a candle in one hand and an apple in the other, about to perform the most thrilling and terrifying divination ritual available to unmarried girls. Your heart is pounding because you're genuinely not sure you want to see what the mirror will show you, but curiosity and the pressure of tradition have brought you here, to this moment, peeling an apple in one long, continuous strip while watching your reflection by candlelight. The ritual is specific and must be followed exactly. You peel the apple, keeping the peel in one unbroken spiral. If it breaks, the charm fails and you must wait another year. Once the peel is complete, you throw it over your left shoulder, and the shape it forms on the floor will be the first initial of your future husband's name. Then you eat a piece of the apple while staring into the mirror, and if you're brave enough to continue looking, your future husband's face will appear in the glass behind your own reflection, as if he's standing there watching you. The apple peel lands behind you in what might be an M or a W depending on how you look at it, which is frustratingly ambiguous. You're squinting at it, trying to determine which letter it truly resembles, when movement in the mirror catches your eye. For just a moment, and you'll never be entirely sure if this was real or imagination, you see a shadow behind your reflection, the suggestion of a male face, features too blurred to identify but definitely present. You drop the candle in terror, plunging the room into darkness, and you're stumbling away from the mirror with your heart trying to escape your chest. You don't look back. You don't relight the candle to investigate further. You're done with that particular divination ritual, and you'll never perform it again, though years later you'll marry a man named Martin, which could be the M from the apple peel, or could be complete coincidence, and you'll occasionally wonder if the shadow in the mirror actually showed you his face. But apple divination isn't just for All Hallows Eve. There are simpler, less terrifying methods for everyday use. You can cut an apple horizontally to reveal the star pattern inside, the 5-pointed star formed by the seed chambers, and count the seeds. An even number of seeds means you'll marry soon. An odd number means a longer wait. All black seeds mean a happy marriage. Any white or underdeveloped seeds mean difficulties in the relationship. You've cut dozens of apples over the years, examining their seeds like oracles, and you've noticed that the happiest-looking apples, reddest, most perfect on the outside, sometimes contain the most disappointing seed arrangements inside, which feels like useful metaphorical guidance for choosing partners. Hemp seed divination is another popular method, though it requires more courage than apple peeling. On a night when the moon is full, you're supposed to walk backward through the churchyard at midnight, scattering hemp seed and chanting, "Hemp seed I sow, hemp seed I mow. Let him that is my true love come after me and mow." The spirit of your future husband will then appear behind you, mimicking the mowing motion, and if you turn around you'll see his face. But turning around breaks the spell and potentially angers the spirit, so you're supposed to resist the urge to look, just knowing he's there. You attempted this once with 3 other girls, all of you giggling nervously as you scattered seeds in the dark churchyard, trying to walk backward without tripping on graves. Did you see anything? The other girls claim they saw shadows, felt presences, heard footsteps. You felt mostly cold and scared and foolish, stumbling over roots while trying to recite the chant correctly. But walking home afterward, You had an overwhelming sense of being followed, and whether that was spirit or imagination or simply the natural anxiety of walking alone at night, you'll never know. Mirror gazing at particular times offers other insights. If you look into a mirror by the light of the full moon, you can supposedly see your future: marriage, children, prosperity, or poverty. The images appear faintly, superimposed over your reflection, showing scenes from your life to come. You've tried this repeatedly, and mostly you just see your own face looking tired and hopeful. But occasionally, very occasionally, you think you see movement, shadows, suggestions of something beyond the glass that might be prophecy or might be wishful thinking reflected back. There's also the tradition of sleeping with a piece of wedding cake under your pillow, which will cause you to dream of your future spouse. The cake must be given to you by a newly married woman, taken from her wedding feast, and placed under your pillow without speaking after midnight. You've done this exactly once, using a crumb of cake from your cousin's wedding, and you dreamed of absolutely nothing memorable, which you chose to interpret as meaning. Marriage was still distant rather than meaning the charm didn't work. Water divination is simpler and less frightening. You fill a bowl with clean water and drop rose petals onto the surface. If the petals drift together, you'll marry soon. If they drift apart, marriage is far off. If they sink immediately, you'll never marry at all. Your rose petals typically float around in circles, neither converging nor diverging, which feels accurate for your courtship with Martin. Ongoing, uncertain, circling possibility without clear commitment. Egg white divination is popular for predicting not just marriage, but the nature of your future husband's occupation. You break an egg, separate the white from the yolk, and drop the white into a glass of water. The shapes the egg white forms as it drifts and settles supposedly reveal your future husband's profession. A ship means a sailor, a plough means a farmer, a hammer means a blacksmith. You've performed this divination multiple times, and the egg whites always form incomprehensible blobs that you have to squint at and interpret creatively, seeing ships where there might just be amorphous protein structures. Historians still argue whether these divination practices represent genuine belief in supernatural revelation, or whether they are primarily social rituals, excuses for girls to gather and talk about romance and marriage in a culture that otherwise restricts such discussions. You suspect it's both. The rituals are genuine attempts to glimpse the future, but they're also permission to focus on your own desires and possibilities in a world that usually directs your attention to others' needs. Dream interpretation extends beyond just sleeping with cake. Certain dreams predict marriage or courtship developments. Dreaming of losing a tooth means a proposal is coming. Dreaming of clear water means a faithful husband. Dreaming of muddy water means an unfaithful one. Dreaming of birds means news about your romantic life. The type of bird provides specifics. Doves mean happy news, crows mean sad news, and ravens mean your current courtship will end badly. You keep a mental catalogue of your dreams, reviewing them each morning for signs and symbols related to your future marriage. Last night you dreamed of finding coins in the garden, which traditionally means unexpected good fortune, and you're choosing to interpret this as positive developments with Martin, though the dream might also just reflect your financial anxieties or the fact that you actually found those coins by the carrots last week. There's also the practice of counting magpies to predict romantic fortune. 1 for sorrow, 2 for joy, 3 for a girl, 4 for a boy, 5 for silver, 6 for gold, 7 for a secret never to be told. You see 2 magpies this morning on your way to the well, and you're claiming the 2 for joy prediction, as a positive sign about your romantic life, even though the rhyme probably has nothing to do with romance and everything to do with general fortune-telling. The desperate and the brave sometimes consult actual fortune-tellers, wise women on the village outskirts who read palms, interpret cards, or gaze into crystals. You've never gone yourself, too nervous about what you might learn, too worried about the church's condemnation of such practices, too uncertain whether you want definite knowledge or prefer hopeful ignorance. But you know girls who have consulted these women and returned with specific predictions. You'll marry a man whose name begins with J, or you'll have 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter, or your marriage will be happy but brief. Whether these predictions come true, or whether they simply shape behavior and perception until they become self-fulfilling, you can't say. But standing here now, married to Martin for 5 years, mother of 2 children with another on the way, you think back to all those divination rituals, all those attempts to see the future, and you smile. The future came regardless of what the apple peel spelled, or what the mirrors showed. You're living it now, and it's simultaneously exactly what you predicted and nothing like you imagined. The contractions are beginning, and you're watching the midwife move through your bedchamber with purposeful intensity, undoing every knot, opening every lock, loosening every closure in the room. This isn't housekeeping, this is magic, sympathetic magic, designed to ensure your body opens as easily as these doors and drawers and containers. She's untying the ribbons on your shift, unbinding your hair from its usual braid, even opening the chest at the foot of the bed and the small box on the windowsill. Everything must be open, unlocked, unbound, because a closed container in a birthing room means a closed womb, means the baby trapped inside, means labour that goes on forever with no progress. Your mother-in-law has already checked that all doors in the house are unlocked, not just the bedchamber door, but every door in the cottage. A locked door anywhere in the dwelling creates spiritual resistance to the birth. Your husband has been sent outside with instructions not to lock anything, not to tie anything, to keep his own clothing loosely fastened. Some traditions even require the father to unknot his shoes and unbuckle his belt, as if his body's closures sympathetically affect yours. The midwife places a special key under your pillow, an old iron key to a church door that she's borrowed from the priest. Keys have profound symbolic power in childbirth. They represent opening, access, passage from one state to another. This particular key, having opened sacred space, carries divine authority in its unlocking properties. You're not entirely sure this makes logical sense, but logic isn't what's needed right now. You need reassurance, ritual, the accumulated wisdom of generations of women who've survived this process. She's also brought an eagle stone, a hollow stone containing smaller stones inside that rattle when shaken. These rare stones are passed between women, inherited, treasured, and supposedly ease labour when tied to the mother's thigh. The stone is attached to your leg now with a red ribbon, red for life and blood and vitality, and you can feel its slight weight, hear its soft rattle when you shift position. Whether it actually helps, or whether it simply gives you something to focus on besides the pain, you're grateful for its presence. Historians have documented eagle stones used in childbirth across Europe, with some specimens still preserved in museums, the red ribbons long faded but the stones intact. Modern medicine has no explanation for how a hollow rock could influence labour, but medieval women swore by them, and the stones were valuable enough to be mentioned in wills and carefully loaned between neighbours. The midwife is chanting prayers and blessings, her words a mixture of approved Catholic petitions to St. Margaret, patron saint of childbirth, and older invocations that probably predate Christianity. Saint Margaret, who emerged from the dragon's belly, help this child emerge safely. As the Lord opened the Red Sea, let this womb open. As Christ broke free from the tomb, let this child break free into life. The imagery is violent, dragons breaking, emerging from death, but birth is violent, and perhaps violent prayers are appropriate. Your mother has placed a bowl of salt and a lit candle on the table beside the bed. The salt purifies the space, protects against evil spirits who might try to harm the vulnerable newborn. The candle's flame must stay lit throughout the labour and birth. If it goes out, the baby's soul might not properly enter the body. You're watching that flame with perhaps more intensity than the actual contractions merit. Terrified it might gutter and die. There's a birthing girdle wrapped around your belly, a long strip of parchment inscribed with prayers and holy names, worn by countless women before you and passed down through your family. The parchment is stained and soft from use, the prayers barely legible, but its power is supposedly undiminished. Some birthing girdles contain measurements of Christ's body or the Virgin Mary's height, as if divine proportions can somehow ensure safe delivery. Yours simply has psalm verses and the names of protective saints written in fading ink. The position you're labouring in matters too. You're not lying flat. That's the worst possible position, trapping the baby against your spine, fighting gravity. Instead, you're crouching, supported by your mother and the midwife, using a birthing stool that allows you to work with gravity rather than against it. The stool is another inherited object, carved wood worn smooth by generations of labouring women, and you're gripping its arms while your body does its ancient work. But there are rules even for the birthing stool. You must face east, toward the rising sun, toward new beginnings and resurrection. Facing west means facing sunset, death, endings. Absolutely forbidden. The midwife has positioned the stool carefully, checking the room's orientation, ensuring you're facing the correct direction. Nobody's allowed to cross their arms or legs in the birthing room. All crossed limbs symbolically close the birth passage. Your mother sits with her arms loose, legs uncrossed, maintaining openness. Visitors who enter must immediately uncross any crossed limbs, and you've already snapped at your aunt who walked in with her arms folded. Food and drink brought to you during labour must be carefully chosen. Milk is good, white, pure, nourishing. Wine is acceptable for courage and pain relief. But nothing salty, nothing preserved, nothing that represents binding or closure. You're sipping watered wine between contractions, grateful for the slight dulling of sensation it provides. The baby's father must not be present. Men in the birthing room bring bad luck and complicate the spiritual dynamics. This is women's work, women's mystery, and male presence disrupts the female power that guides birth. Your husband is outside somewhere, probably drinking with neighbours, trying not to think about what's happening in here. The midwife checks the baby's position by palpating your belly, and she seems satisfied. A baby entering the world headfirst is correct, natural, blessed. A breech baby, feet or bottom first, is literally backward, inverted, spiritually concerning. Such babies are often believed to have special powers, the ability to heal, to see spirits, to predict futures. But they're also harder to birth and more likely to die in the process. You're relieved your baby appears to be positioned correctly. She gives you a special tea made from raspberry leaves, feverfew, and other herbs whose names you don't know. The tea is meant to strengthen contractions, speed labour, prevent excessive bleeding afterward. Whether it works pharmacologically or psychologically, you drink it gratefully, trusting the midwife's experience. The pain is intensifying now, and you're entering the phase where you stop caring about symbolism and start just wanting this to be over. The midwife is coaching you to breathe, to push, to rest, to push again. Your mother is murmuring prayers and encouragement. The candle flame flickers but stays lit. The eagle stone rattles against your thigh. And then, after hours that feel like days, the baby emerges, slippery and red and screaming, absolutely perfect. The midwife catches her. It's a girl, and you're crying from relief and exhaustion and overwhelming love. The baby is here, alive, apparently healthy, and all the rituals and charms and prayers have either worked or were unnecessary, and you don't care which, because the result is this. A living child, a successful birth, a continuation of your family line. The midwife ties the umbilical cord with a red thread, always red, never white or black, and cuts it with a blade that's been blessed. The afterbirth is caught in a special bowl to be buried later under a fruit tree, returning fertility to the earth. The baby is wiped clean and wrapped in linen that's been prayed over, layers of protection already being established. You're holding your daughter now, counting her fingers and toes, checking for the normal and dreading the abnormal. She seems whole, healthy, beautifully ordinary. The midwife will stay for several more hours, monitoring you both, ensuring no complications develop, and tomorrow the traditions will continue. The baptism must happen quickly. The protective measures against fairy theft, the careful management of this new vulnerable life. But right now, you're just marveling that the process worked, that your body knew what to do, that all the unlocked doors and loosened hair and eagle stones and prayers somehow conspired to deliver you safely to this moment. Mother and daughter, both alive, beginning the next chapter of your complicated, superstition-filled existence together. The wheel of the year is turning again, and you're preparing for the seasonal transition with the same meticulous attention you'd give to fortifying a castle before siege. These threshold moments, the shift from winter to spring, summer to autumn, are when the barriers between worlds grow thin, when supernatural forces move more freely, when your household is most vulnerable and most in need of renewal. You've marked the calendar, consulted the moon phase, and gathered your supplies, because the annual protection ritual is not something you can afford to skip or postpone. It's the eve of May Day, Beltane in the old tongue that your grandmother sometimes whispered, and tonight the fairies are abroad in force, more active and dangerous than any other night of the year. You're going through the cottage room by room, refreshing protections that have weakened over the past 12 months, replacing charms whose power has faded, speaking blessings over thresholds and corners and the spaces under beds where darkness gathers. You begin at the main door as you always do, because the door is the primary point of vulnerability. The old horseshoe comes down. It's been there for a year, accumulating dust and rust, and you replace it with a new one, freshly acquired from the blacksmith, still holding the heat of the forge in its iron curve. You position it carefully, ends pointing upward to hold the luck in, and you hammer it into place with 3 strikes, speaking a protection prayer with each blow. Guard this house from fire and flood, from evil eye and spilling blood, from fairy theft and demon's breath, from sickness, sorrow, and early death. The salt line across the threshold needs renewal. You sweep away the old salt, a year's worth of spiritual accumulation, possibly contaminated by whatever it's been blocking, and lay down a fresh line using salt you've blessed yourself by leaving it in moonlight and praying over it. Some women have their salt blessed by the priest, but you prefer to handle this protection personally, woman to woman across the generations, continuing traditions that predate the Church's involvement in domestic magic. The rowan branches above the door are brittle and brown, their protective virtue exhausted. You take them down carefully. Rowan deserves respect even when spent, and you'll burn them later in the Beltane fire, releasing whatever protective energy remains. The new rowan branches are fresh cut this morning, leaves still green, berries red and potent. You bind them with red thread in a cross shape and hang them above the door, knowing they'll guard against witchcraft and malevolent magic for another year. Moving to the windows, you replace the St. John's wort bundles, the vervain sachets, the small bags of protective herbs that have been hanging for 12 months. Each window receives fresh guardians. Each sill gets a new line of salt. Each frame gets anointed with holy water you've saved from last Easter. You're muttering constantly as you work, prayers and charms and simple statements of intent. Keep out harm, keep in love, bless below and guard above. The hearth requires special attention because it's both the home's heart and a potential entry point for spirits. Anything that can travel down the chimney has access to your house. You've let the fire burn down to nothing, cleaning out the accumulated ash of the past season. Some of this ash you'll save for medicinal and magical purposes. Ash has purifying properties, but most of it you're discarding, clearing away the old to make space for the new. Before relighting the fire, you arrange protective stones around the hearth's edge. Smooth river rocks you've collected, each one chosen for its pleasing shape and good energy. These stones will absorb heat and radiate protection, creating a barrier that malevolent entities will find difficult to cross. You also tuck iron nails into the mortar between stones, extra insurance against fairy intrusion. The new fire is lit with ceremony. You've acquired need fire from a neighbour. Fire created by friction, by rubbing sticks together without using flint or existent flames. Need fire is particularly powerful, untainted by previous use, born fresh for this purpose. You transfer it to your hearth carefully, feeding it with blessed kindling, speaking it into strength. Burn bright, burn true, warm this home the whole year through. Guard this hearth from darkest night, keep this family in your light. Your collection of hanging herbs needs assessment. Some bundles are still potent. Rosemary keeps well, its sharp scent undiminished. Others have lost their virtue and need replacement. You're taking down faded bundles and hanging fresh ones, restocking your aromatic arsenal. The mugwort is particularly important to replace annually, as its prophetic properties fade quickly. Fresh mugwort gathered at midsummer lasts exactly 1 year before becoming spiritually inert. The iron scissors under the baby's cradle are showing rust spots, which weakens their protective power against fairy theft. You replace them with a new pair, carefully positioning them in their open cross formation. The red thread woven through the cradle's frame has faded to pink, which means it's time for fresh thread, deeper red, more vibrant protection. Your daughter is older now, less vulnerable to fairy substitution, but you're not taking chances. Protection overkill is impossible when it comes to children. The mirrors have been covered since Thomas's death weeks ago, and you're finally uncovering them, wiping them clean, checking for any signs of spiritual contamination. Glass is tricky. It can hold impressions, memories, traces of what it's reflected. You're looking for shadows that shouldn't be there, movement that has no source, any indication that something has taken up residence in the reflective surface. Everything looks clear, thankfully, and you can return the mirrors to normal use. You're also renewing the protection on your storage areas, the larder, the root cellar, anywhere food is kept. Fresh garlic braids, new salt containers, blessed water sprinkled on shelves. Food, is life, and protecting your food supply is protecting your family's survival. You take this task seriously, checking every container, every barrel, every sack, ensuring nothing has spoiled or become contaminated over the winter. The bedchamber gets its annual overhaul, fresh herbs under pillows, new protection bags hung from bedposts, all linens washed in water that's had protective prayers spoken over it. You're replacing the knife under the mattress. The old one has done its job, and a fresh blade brings fresh protection. The cat receives a new collar with a small brass bell, because bells dispel negative energy, and the sound announces her presence to any spirits that might otherwise startle her. Historians still argue whether these annual renewal rituals represent genuine belief in their necessity, or whether they're primarily practical house-cleaning disguised as spiritual practice, a cultural mechanism ensuring people thoroughly clean and organize their homes at least once yearly. You suspect it's both. The protections need renewal, yes, but the process also forces you to inspect every corner of your home, to notice and repair things that need attention, to refresh and reorganize your domestic space. The chicken coop receives blessings and fresh rowan branches. The garden gets a perimeter of salt and a prayer for abundance. Even the privy gets a small protective charm because, uncomfortable as it is to contemplate, you're vulnerable when using it, and protection should extend to all areas of life. By the time you finish, the sun is setting and you're exhausted, but the cottage feels different, lighter somehow, cleaner spiritually, refreshed and fortified. You've pushed back the accumulated darkness of the year, renewed your defences, restated your claim to safety and protection. The house is ready to face whatever the next 12 months bring. Tonight there will be bonfires in the village, dancing, celebration marking the season's turn. Young people will jump over flames for luck and fertility. Cattle will be driven between two fires for purification and protection. The whole community is participating in this threshold moment, acknowledging the thinness between worlds and taking action to protect themselves. But your work is essentially done. The house is prepared, the protections are renewed, and you can rest knowing you've done everything within your power to ensure your family's safety for another year. Tomorrow the ordinary rhythms resume: baking, washing, tending children and animals, managing the endless tasks of medieval housekeeping. But tonight, on this threshold evening, you've touched something older and deeper than daily routine. You've participated in the ancient human practice of marking boundaries, of claiming safety in an uncertain world, of using ritual and symbol and accumulated tradition to create order from chaos. Whether the protections work in any objective sense matters less than the fact that they connect you to your grandmother and her grandmother before her, all the way back through an unbroken chain of women who stood at their own thresholds, speaking their own blessings, guarding their own families with the tools they had available. The wheel turns, the year renews, and you turn and renew with it, marking the passage with salt and iron and prayer, doing what women have always done, protecting, preserving, enduring, and somehow finding grace in the endless repetition of necessary tasks. The seasons continue their eternal cycle, and you continue with them, moving through days and months and years, each one bringing new challenges and familiar rituals. The superstitions that govern your life might seem strange to future generations, excessive or absurd or rooted in ignorance. But they're also wisdom, accumulated observations about patterns and probabilities, psychological strategies for managing anxiety, and social structures that create meaning and connection. You've swept demons from your threshold on thousands of mornings. You've read prophecies in bread and eggs and chicken behavior. You've protected your children with iron and salt and prayer. You've navigated laundry days and menstrual cycles and seasonal transitions, always mindful of the invisible forces that might be watching, judging, interfering. And somehow, through all of this elaborate superstitious choreography, you've survived. Your family has survived. The household has endured. Whether that's because the superstitions work, or because the careful attention they require makes you more observant and prepared, or because survival is simply what humans do regardless of their beliefs, you'll never know for certain. But as you settle into bed tonight, protected by your arsenal of charms and prayers, surrounded by the familiar creaks and sighs of your cottage, you feel something close to peace. The work is never finished. Tomorrow brings new omens to interpret, new protections to maintain, new supernatural concerns to manage. But tonight, in this moment, everything is as it should be. The cat is purring at your feet. The fire is banked safely. The doors are properly positioned, the shoes correctly placed, the herbs hanging overhead. Your husband breathes steadily beside you, and your children sleep safely in their beds, guarded by scissors and thread and a mother's eternal vigilance. The medieval world is harsh and uncertain, filled with dangers both real and imagined. But you've built your fortress of routine and ritual, your castle of superstition and tradition, and within these walls, defended by generations of women's wisdom, you are as safe as it's possible to be. Sleep comes gently, carrying you into dreams where bread always rises perfectly. Chickens lay only fortunate eggs, and every omen points toward blessing. Tomorrow you'll wake and begin again, sweeping your threshold, checking your protections, reading the world's endless signs. But tonight, you rest, cradled by tradition, protected by belief, held in the embrace of practices so old their origins are lost to time, and in the darkness the house settles around you like a living thing, keeping its own watch, offering its own protection, sheltering you through another night in your long, strange, superstition-filled journey through medieval life. Sweet dreams,